Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Deep Thoughts. And today we're talking about Dr. Stone, Episode 10, A Flimsy Alliance. Before we begin though, I do want to give a quick shout out to my boy at ShonenOG over on Twitter for shouting out last week's video. It is appreciated, my friend, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Dr. Stone video, then be sure to share this one around on the internet and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's video. Now, with that said, we're gonna go ahead and jump into this week's episode, share some of my deep thoughts on this week's episode, and we're gonna go ahead and start with the same place that the beginning of the episode starts with, that being Edison. We actually get to learn a little bit about Senku and his history with science, as we learn that Thomas Edison was in fact the first biography Senku ever sat and read through. And I do think that Edison's legacy has left in a real impact on Senku as a character, and I'll be interested to actually go back and maybe look up a little bit more history on Edison than I know at current. Edison in that era of history is not really my strong suit. I'm more of a European history, Renaissance era type guy. So I'm not super well versed in Edison as a person, his history, yada yada, but I would be interested to actually read an Edison biography to maybe get an idea of how he impacted Senku, and maybe like if his history is going to mirror Senku's in some way, like maybe the writer is purposely hinting that in some capacity. I doubt it, but it'd be interesting to see. I always kind of likened Senku more to a Nikola Tesla than to Thomas Edison, so I thought that was interesting that Edison was the one who really seemed to first impact Senku, and it seemingly sparked his interest in electricity, and yes, that pun was very much intended. You know me, I like my puns, but anyway, I do think it's interesting. It really sort of echoes Senku's journey thus far, really cementing the whole light bulb moment as a much bigger deal than it already was, given that Senku was basically following in an idol's footsteps just to get to where he is now. I think it's interesting. It adds a little bit of another layer to an already pretty interesting character, that being Senku himself. And what makes Senku all the more interesting in particular is his relationship with the characters around him, Taiju, Yuzuriha, and in this particular case, Gen and Tsukasa, as we open the episode with a conversation about whether or not Gen should be allowed to run around, whether or not Tsukasa is bad, and the gang all agrees Tsukasa is bad. Everybody except Senku. Everybody except Senku is like, Tsukasa's clearly a villain, he tried to kill Senku, he wants to destroy science, this man is clearly bad, gotta be stopped, and Gen's on his side, so we can't trust Gen, but then again, Gen did save our asses from from magma, so he can't be all bad, so maybe there's reasoning to be done with Gen, but I don't trust him. And basically this entire time Senku says nothing. Senku doesn't say a freaking thing, because Senku is aware that the world is not as black and white as our gang seems to believe that it is. Senku doesn't say a word about Tsukasa that entire time, even though they're stating that Tsukasa killed Senku at one point. But all Senku really replies with is, "I'm not dead." Like, that's all I'm not dead. Basically saying, like, he tried to kill me, but he didn't, and was aware that I was probably going to be alive. So he's not saying his silence does not, to me, implicitly say like Tsukasa's a good guy. We just have different ideologies. Like, no, he's not saying that. And he's not saying that Tsukasa is bad either. His silence just merely, to me, demonstrates that Senku is rational in the sense that he doesn't really believe people are good or bad. They're just people. And Tsukasa just happens to be different in his ideology to Senku. And like we've said before in previous episodes, Tsukasa and Senku could have been friends, and they say as much in a previous episode. And Tsukasa, if you didn't know, is probably my favorite character in the show. I just find him really fascinating, even though his kingdom kind of sucks by comparison to Senku so far, and that's saying something, and we'll get there. But I was happy to have that moment because I think the Senku-Tsukasa relationship is really fascinating. And like I said, Tsukasa, I think maybe he won't be my favorite character anymore because like the gang at the village really are taking over my favorite character slots. But Tsukasa remains one of the more interesting characters, and at the very least, I find to be one of the more interesting antagonists this season. And the same can be said for Gen. I've seen a lot of people say like, oh man, like Chrome ain't even nothing compared to Gen. And I still don't like Gen more than I like Chrome. Like, that's not in question. Chrome is my, like when you look at like my list of favorite characters, Chrome basically fits right in there with a lot of other people. So like that to me is not a surprise. But Gen reminds me a hell of a lot of Loki, and Loki is my favorite MCU character. So Gen is in the potential running. I need to see a little bit more from him, although I did see quite a bit of growth in this one episode alone, and he's definitely making a play for Best Boy. But so far, it's still Chrome, because I'm not going to count Senku or Tsukasa, because that's kind of unfair. They're like the main antagonist and main protagonist. I don't consider, like, Best Boy to me is like somebody else besides the main character, at least in my opinion. So it's Chrome currently, but Gen's making that play. Because again, he's not a good or bad person, and in fact just declares that he's out for himself. He doesn't really care about Tsukasa, and he doesn't really care about Senku either. He's out for himself, although maybe that's not quite the case. Gen's complicated, much like Loki from the MCU. Gen's complicated, a lot going on there. And I think it's interesting too, the relationship we actually see between Gen and Tsukasa, which I wasn't expecting to see this early. We actually see the first time that Gen and Tsukasa met, and to my shock, it was not in the Stone World. The first time that these two characters met was on a TV set, with Gen doing his whole mentalist thing, meeting Tsukasa, the primate, or the strongest primate in high school, or whatever it was that they called Tsukasa back in the day. So he was already aware of Tsukasa, so already he was intimidated. Then he saw that the man's like gathering up his armies and stuff like that, gathering up the statues to start his kingdom, right? Like his kingdom of whatever. Burly dudes. his kingdom of muscle, ultimate muscle. Sorry, but it's an interesting scene to me, because it's like, okay, I can understand why Gen is loyal to Tsukasa, because he's scared, and he's already met Tsukasa, so he knows the kid is strong, and he knows that he's not just brawn though; he's also quite sharp. And it's, I don't know, I thought it was interesting. And it just made me feel all the more bad for Gen when you think like, man, he really got thrown into this situation, huh? When he then is on the receiving end of an unholy beatdown, and it is delivered by the dumbest character on the entire show. Seriously, this character sucks, but I'm gonna get to him in a second. And I'm sure people will be like, nah, you're gonna have to bear with me on this one. Before I get to Magma, who again, I just... awful. But before we get to him, I do want to point out that the Gen beatdown was wicked clever on Gen's part, because I actually thought for the show really did get me. I thought for a second that Gen was dead. I was like, what? Like, that's where this dude's story ends? That's really sad. And then I was like, wait, but everybody keeps saying he's Best Boy, so he can't die here. And then when they rush over to him, I thought that they were going to use the revival fluid, or whatever you want to call it, the revival medicine, the stone, whatever. And that's not what ends up happening, mainly because I remembered, like, they don't have any. So I was like, oh man, what are they going to do? Turns out Gen, the wicked, clever bugger that he is, decided to actually store bags of fake blood on himself. So on the off chance that somebody does try to kill him, he can make it look like he's dead and play possum, which he does, which is so friggin' clever. And then Suika steps up in a big way to save the day, rolling along to try to figure out who's behind the mysterious murder of Gen, even though he's alive. A lot of, like, murder but not dead going on in this episode. I do want to point out something about the episode that bothered me immensely, and this is what held the episode back from being an A-grade material, and that is Magma. This character sucks. This character is basically just anime Gaston. Like, that's just who this character is. At the very least, while I can relate, like, characters like Gen to Loki, like, I could say, like, oh, Gen is like anime Loki. Gen is still a unique enough character on his own, with the whole mentalist thing, the magician thing, the fact that he's just a guy. Gen is a lot more colorful and goofy than Loki is, whereas Loki's sort of like this mischievous, like, edgelord. Gen is a lot more fun, and for lack of a better word, anime than Loki is. Whereas with Magma, he's just Gaston, except he doesn't sing. Like so he's worse. he's even lamer than Gaston, because at least Gaston is fun. Magma's just dumb, and in my opinion, just kind of is here for the sake of plot. Magma's not a character. He mistakes Gen for Senku. He says out loud that he's going to try to make it look like Ruri like drank herself to death in front of other villagers. He's only here to be an obstacle. He's not a character. At least right now. Again, these videos are episodic reviews, and what I gather in this episode is that Magma's not exactly a great character. Maybe that changes down the line. I have no idea. Right now, he is lamer anime Gaston. That's just who he is to me. But at the very, very least, it makes the setup for this next couple episodes really neat, because the setup for the whole battle for the chief village position is great. That's a really good idea, and it's equally great in terms of narrative, as like this is a cool new way to move the plot forward. It's also interesting on a character position, since we see Ginro and Kinro actually joining the Kingdom of Science more properly, and this time maybe one of them are going to become chief. I'm hoping for Ginro, or Kinro. The not the blonde kid, the other guy. That guy I like. Not that I don't like the blonde kid. I just think the brown-haired kid would be a much better village leader. I can actually see him fulfilling that role. And plus, too, the whole like going from bodyguard to village leader is sort of a neat little character arc. So I think that'd be fun. And Kinro, I like as well. The blonde kid. I'm hoping I'm not getting those names confused. But yeah, like the blonde kid I like too. But I just can't see him being village leader. But I can see Kohaku being village leader, but I just don't know how they would work that out. I can also see it being Chrome. It'd be a little cliche, but the Dr. Stone does manage to turn cliches and make them fun again. So if it is Chrome, I'm sure that they'd handle it pretty well. And I think Chrome is the most is the character who will benefit the most from this upcoming arc, with the whole like trying to become the chief of the village, because he doesn't give a damn about being chief. All he wants to do is heal Ruri. That's all he's ever wanted. So the fact that he's just a Ruri, like the immediate benefit to him is that she's okay. So when Senku makes fun of him, saying like, she just like, we don't want you to train because the only reason we're being nice to you is because we feel bad because the other characters are gonna marry Rui in front of you. So you know, that's a thing. But instead of being like, oh, I'm not mad, baka, like instead he's just like, no, I don't care. As long as she's safe, my feelings are like next to meaningless, which is like, dude, Chrome, that's good stuff, man. Like, I really appreciate that. That to me was dope. But with that said, everybody, I'm going to give this week's episode a solid rank of B. It's, as always, a fun, good time. I really dig Dr. Stone. It's just a good, fun time. I really enjoy it. But hey, before we go, everybody, as always, I have to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier: Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Dominic, Urza, King Kotaku, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Nye, Omnigaramond, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Tristan, and Verdon. Thanks so much for your continued support over on Patreon, you guys. It is super appreciated, and if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then by all means go ahead and check out the first link in the description, check out our Patreon page, and see all the cool rewards you can get over there, as well as access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. But on that note, everybody, that is going to be a video, so I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then I'm sure you've been on the internet long enough to know what to do already, so I ain't gonna tell you, but I will say that it is appreciated. And if you're feeling stressed out today, you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.